about the rest of, oh, perfect. As we're thinking about, how do we translate some of this values, personal side of ourselves into an actual resume and cover letter, write these words somewhere so that you can reference them back as we're going into that section. Okay. So thank you all for reflecting. I'm loving seeing them all again. So my family, community, educating young scientists, empowering the community. Yeah, thank you all for sharing. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this is our objective and agenda for today. So just quickly, we're going to talk about building a professional kind of narrative for yourself. How do you share your professional story of self? We're going to talk about how to update your resume and cover letter. So this is more on the kind of technical side, things to include on those two. And then lastly, talk about what are some kind of next steps you can take after this session so that you can hold yourself accountable to some of your own career goals. And we just did a grounding exercise, so feel free to, as you're kind of having thoughts or emotions come up, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll engage and read them out loud as we go. And then we'll do a quick story of self and then a cover letter and resume review. Next slide. So I wanted to start off with the story of self framework. This is a story of self framework that I learned when I was in immigrant rights movement. And it was a tool that we used to basically persuade others to either join the movement and or convince lobbyists or senators to pass pro-immigrant legislation. And so when I think about how do I advocate for myself, my mind always goes to the story of self. How can I kind of craft a narrative about this outcome or this demand that I want from somebody based on my personal experiences and tie that to their values that they might also have. And so if we go to the next slide. I have translated this story of self into something that's more of like a personal pitch. And so we're going to quickly think about, what is your personal pitch? How do you frame this story about your professional experience using this little kind of story peak and little timeline that we'll activate right now. So what is a personal pitch? So a personal pitch is similar to an elevator pitch. How many of y'all have heard of elevator pitches? Feel free to react. Yeah, so the elevator pitch, maybe you learned about it in high school and it was like maybe your senior year where your teacher said you have to do something that says something about yourself. And that's basically what it is. But the personal pitch, the way that I think about it is, making sure that there is a lot of context about why you care about the thing that you're talking about. So for example, where would you use this pitch? You can use it to introduce yourself to a mentor, a professor. You can network with this pitch. This can even become your about me on your LinkedIn, right? So how is it that this story can be used to share more of who you are and aligning it to your professional side? And this story has a few components, but I see, Malachi, I see your hand up. Do you have a question? No, okay. Okay, so the personal pitch has these different components. So the first one is context. So who are you, right? What is something that you want people to know about who you are? So as you heard in my introduction that Ale read, something that I want everybody to know is that I am a queer first gen student of color. Like that identity is very close to me. And so when I think about a personal pitch, that is something that I want to share with whoever I'm talking to. And so think about, what are the things that make you who you are that people need to know about you? The second part of that is, what is a challenge that you've had that maybe you decided to try to do something about, to try to overcome, or activated you to do something about it? And so that goes on to the next one, which is a decision that you took. So if you had a challenge, like let's say, maybe you had hated math classes, right? But then you had a challenge where you decided to take on more tutoring. You did that initiative, you took action. And so you want to kind of talk about that in your personal pitch. Where is that action that you took? The next part, which is this little exclamation kind of blurb on here, is, so what? So you're telling me this story about you, you're telling me about your context. And I always ask, okay, so why does that matter? Right? Like, who cares about this thing that you're telling me? And it might sound a little bit blunt, but I'd like to kind of put you on your toes a little bit to think about, yeah, why does this matter? Like, why do people need to know this part of me? And then the last part is, now what? So you told this story, you told somebody that you took this action. Now what do you want to do with this? And so this is where the ask comes in. So for example, if you are doing an informational interview and you are telling them about who you are, maybe you know that you want to work at a certain company where this person works. This is the last part, is kind of where you ask for that, additional 2 more connections, or where you ask for a referral. And so thinking about your personal pitch, it needs to have that kind of like action. What is that other person that you're talking to? How are they going to be moved to do an action for you or support you in some tangible way? And so we'll take about 2 minutes to draw out this little graph wherever you're at, or type it somewhere, and try to fill in these questions and boxes. So context, who are you? What's a challenge that you've had that led you to work in wherever work that you're doing now? Why is this important? And what do you want somebody to get out of that story that you're sharing? Okay. Any questions about this little graph structure? All right. So go ahead and we'll play music again, and you'll have a chance to draw this out for yourself in however method you want to do it. Okay, so take 2 minutes and we'll play some music again. Take 30 seconds. All right. Thank you for the music. And I'm all about lo-fi, so I hope folks are vibing on that as well. All right, so maybe you got to finish some of them, maybe not all of them. but that's okay. So this is really a warm up to what we're going to do for the rest of the session, to kind of get you thinking like, yeah, what is it that I'm about? What is kind of my personal brand when it comes to my professional side? And this is going to be an ongoing process as you're developing your career, right? This personal pitch is going to change, you know, whether you're looking for one type of job, or maybe you've moved up in your career and now your personal pitch is something else. And so this is one tool that you can revisit as you're talking to people and networking. But also as you're maybe at a point of like a crossroads where you're like, yeah, where is it that I want to go next? What's kind of next for me in my career? This is a good activity to just reflect on what's important for you and what impact you want to have. Okay. Does anybody want to, either in the chat or out loud, share what this process was like for you? How was it to think about like your context, a challenge, and what you want to get out of kind of talking to somebody about your personal pitch? And feel free to just chat either a word or how you're feeling kind of going through this process. Reflective. Yeah. So keep sitting with this reflection. Difficult. Yeah. Sometimes we tend to kind of be in our day-to-day, right? In our work, in our jobs, in our work, and not have the time to just be like, wait, let me just sit and think about this. And so if you at least leave with this today, I'm going to count that as a win, right? Where you had at least 2 minutes to just pause and reflect, like, yeah, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? So thank you all for sharing in the chat. So daunting a little bit, challenging, necessary, not really the talking type. Yeah. So even if you tend to be, you know, shy, right? And maybe you're not in that networking stage of your career right now, this can still help in just like reflecting, right? Like, okay, yeah, what have I done the last X years? Pandemic maybe like made you feel like, oh, I'm just in the grind and you're just kind of working from home, but what actually has happened and where have your skills grown? We're going to talk about that today as well. So, all right, thank you so much for engaging in that. We're going to go on to the next slide. And this next slide is just a few reflection questions that you can either screenshot. You all also have access to the slides hopefully later. So you'll be able to kind of take these questions and reflect some more. And a quick hint, these are some questions you should think about when you're embarking on a job search, right? What is something that I value that I want to see in companies or organizations? What is the outcome of being in these roles? Like, what skills am I going to gain? So just leaving you with some more reflection questions as you're embarking on that process. Next slide. Cool. So now we're getting to kind of the nitty gritty of our workshop. So this is what you came up here for, right? This resume. Hopefully you've had some time to kind of just warm up, right? Think about your career a little bit, because this is going to be more of kind of that technical side of how do you actually just say all of this stuff now? How do you make it in a way that makes sense to the employer or whoever it is that you're submitting your resume to? So just back to the basics, what is a resume? It's an opportunity to share your professional trajectory or share that professional story of self. It's one way to communicate your skills to organizations that you're interested in. And it should complement your personal pitch and any additional professional materials, right? And I say that because I know there'll be later workshops that you'll be attending around LinkedIn, right? It doesn't replace LinkedIn profiles, but this all should kind of be complementary to your career and aligning to the goals that you have. Next slide. And then again, just reiterating, there's you can definitely chat in questions as we're going through, and I'll try to get to them. But I am checking the chat so we can like have a conversation if something feels confusion. Next slide. All right. So when we think about the resume, one thing that you're going to hear me say is clean and additive. And so why is it that these are kind of top bolded? sometimes we think about the resume as like, I want to throw everything on there, right? You want to say it all. Or maybe you don't have enough things to say, right? So maybe you're adding a thing from here or there, maybe a random activity that you did to kind of show more of that experience. And I always think about, how do we keep it clean, right? Easy to the eye, but still additive, where if you do need to add, how is it really adding to that experience instead of just repeating maybe similar skills or similar actions that you've done. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, and this is relatively new, I think, since the pandemic started, where more and more companies and organizations are using what we call ATS, so an applicant tracking system. This is basically your companies or orgs that have a platform where you submit your resume to some portal, right? And it maybe goes into the abyss and it feels a little bit like that. This is an ATS system. And so you want to have the ATS system read your resume as clearly as possible. And so this is why I recommend, again, that clean and additive. What is this kind of machine that is being used by companies? How are they gonna read your resume clearly to get you to potentially that first round screener call or interview? The next thing is it must match the job description. And so as you're looking for jobs, you might be applying to jobs that sound very similar to each other, but the job descriptions might be completely different, right? And so you wanna make sure that your keywords from the job description are on the resume. And we'll show you a little bit of kind of where to put those keywords. But when I think about writing your resume, I recommend having the resume open and the job description open and being able to literally like match up what it's saying. So as you're kind of building that resume, if you are not looking for a job right now and you're just kind of wanting to update your resume, I still recommend looking at maybe 1 or 2 job descriptions that can give you some of that key language that you want to include. And then the last one is reverse chronological order. And so that's maybe something that you've heard before, but I want to make sure that you're keeping it to most recent and most relevant. Sometimes we think about like, oh, just put the most recent stuff up top and that's it. But when you're applying to jobs that are, you know, very specific to your skill set, you want to make sure that you also have relevant stuff. So even if it's not recent, how can, you know, kind of capture this somewhere on your resume so that they can see that you have relevant work experience? And we'll talk about where to put that. Next slide. All right. So these are some key components, and we can hit next slide. I think there's some arrows that are showing up. Yeah, perfect. So these are must-have. So there might be some resumes where you're directed to only have 1 page. And some of those might feel difficult if you have a few years of experience and not really sure where to fit everything. For ATS purposes, so these applicant tracking systems, you should try to keep it at 1 page as much as possible. So given that, these are the 4 must-haves that should be on that 1 page if you are limited to that 1 page. So a heading, so some sort of, you know, something like this where it's like blocked letters with your email, your number, and your LinkedIn link. And I'll talk again more specifically what to put within that. And I think you will get the slides later. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Ale will be sending them out. The next thing is overview and highlights. So this is the part where your relevant work experience that might be super old, right? It might be something that you did a few years ago, but you want to make sure that it comes up top. That can go into your overview section. And what that is basically a breakdown of what are some kind of highlights about your career. Before we used to think about like, oh, you have to start with your like education and right away talk about all your experiences. Now we really recommend that you have some sort of like summary or a highlight section on the top to really capture kind of just an overview of how many years of experience, really like list down either specific like software that you're really good at or any other skills that you have been able to kind of reach expert level. The next category after that is relevant experience, which we'll go into more deeply. And then lastly, education. Can we hit next, please? And then these are some, oh, go back one. Yeah, these are some optional ones. So if you do have an opportunity to submit a resume that is longer than one page, so this is for, usually nonprofits or companies that require like a cover letter will probably have more flexibility along how much that resume can be. You can have an objective, which kind of details like exactly what role you're applying to. Again, you don't really need that if your resume is matching the job description keywords. If you've been a part of a board or let's say like a club at your campus where you've kind of done some work, but it's not necessarily a paid experience, that can go on there as well. And then any other volunteer experiences. So I always say any experience is experience. So even if you didn't get paid, right, if you kind of did volunteer work or you supported some organization in some way, but didn't necessarily get paid full rate, whatever it might be, those are all experiences. And so you want to capture those somewhere on your resume. They don't have to be super detailed, but you do want to be able to kind of speak to those experiences in some way. All right, we can hit next. Cool. So for the heading, so I'm going to break down some of these kind of different components. So for the heading, you want to have your name, your phone number, your email, and the LinkedIn profile URL. So not necessarily embedded link, because there might be people that are printing this out. And so if somebody's printing out a resume that has an embedded link, they won't be able to see your LinkedIn URL. And so I always recommend putting the full URL with the .com and everything else. And then you can forget your address. Nobody needs to know where you live. If the role that you're applying to is relevant to a certain region, for example, the San Francisco Bay Area, right? And you want to show that you're in that area, you can put that, but you don't have to put your full address. Okay, that's like old school times. So you can go ahead and delete that off if you have your resume open right now. The next part is a highlight. So this is the overview, highlight, summary. These are kind of different ways that you can name that section. These are kind of the top 5 areas you want to show that you are like an expert in, right? So for example, if you have X amount of years of experience of doing one thing, that should be kind of front and center up top, right? So making sure that you kind of summarize that. So let's say you've been maybe a program manager, but in different types of companies and kind of done different types of things for the last 5 years. That's something that you can put 5 years of program management experience up top in the highlights before they even read all your other sections, okay? And you can group them by topic or function area. So for example, if you have done maybe a little bit of everything, you've maybe done some like social media content creation, but then you've also done some program management, you can kind of bulk these bullet points into what I call meatier bullet points. So they don't have to be just one sentence. They can be maybe a block of 2 or 3 sentences that really summarize this general skill that you have, okay? All right, next slide. Okay, so relevant experience is that next biggest part of your resume, and I'll get to the questions in a second from the chat. But the relevant experience is, okay, what aligns the most to the jobs that you're applying to? If you're not applying to jobs right now, like I said, you can have an ongoing resume that just kind of has all of this in one page, and then maybe delete as you're applying to jobs later on. And so this can be relevant experience. Again, it doesn't have to be paid. They don't need to know how much you made from these companies, or if you didn't, if you volunteered. You want to just show that you had a skill set that you used and that you took action in during those experiences. And so it could be either in scope, and by scope, I mean, is it in the general field, same field, or is it a certain skill set that you were using that maybe wasn't in the same field, but that you can still talk about, okay? And then the last section was education. And so this is, if you're in college now, what program are you in? Are you in a grad program? If the GPA is recent, so if you just recently graduated and you feel good about your GPA, you want to go ahead and put that. if you graduated college maybe over 5 years ago, that GPA is not as relevant anymore. Okay. So it just depends kind of where you're at in your career. And then any relevant courses or training. So this is really specific for like technical skills. So for example, did you take a software class that you really want to highlight on your resume? That should go under relevant experience or training. Okay. And then there was one question asking any suggestions or tips for companies that are asking for a CV rather than a resume. Yeah, so for CV, the way that I think about the difference is the CV is really capturing anything that you did that was also publications and or presentations. So if you have publications or presentations, that would go into a CV. It wouldn't go into a resume. Do you have other things that you did, like a presentation at a conference that is relevant to that field? Then you'll go ahead and put that on there. Okay. Yeah, so if you have publications, I would recommend creating a CV instead of a resume. You can still put like a publication section on a resume, but if you are at that point where you've had publications, you've had conferences, you should transition over to a CV. And feel free to reach out to me after if like you have specific questions, because there are some kind of other things to know around the CV. All right, we can go to the next slide. Quick note on awards and accomplishments. So awards, you want to list them under the company experience that you got it in. So for example, if you got an award at X role that you're in right now, you can list it under that relevant experience, like selected for X award because of right? Whatever that explanation was of why you got that award. And then accomplishments can go under the highlight section as long as they tie into that job description. Okay, so just a quick note about those two. Next slide. All right, so how do you word everything? How many of you, this is like the worst part of the resume building? I'll say for me, I know it's still definitely really hard. So great, right? Like I have this other experience. How do I actually like talk about it now? So can we hit next, please? So one framework that I use is the STAR framework, and you can also use this for your interview preparation. The STAR framework touches on these 4 different kind of actions or descriptions that you should have in your bullet points. So the first thing is situation. This is where you kind of define the general context of the project or role. So what else are you, what are you kind of generally doing in this job or role? The task is identify the key objective or goal you had to complete or do. So this is like, okay, you're an intern somewhere. That's the situation. The task is, what did you actually like have to do? What did you actually like have to get done by the end of that internship that you had to get done? The action, this is where the kind of initiative side of what you did that brought that role to be differently than anybody else doing that role, is where you describe what action you took. So this is where you get to emphasize, like, this is how I did that task and why it was so great that I did that initiative, right? Or I took that action. And then lastly, summarizing the outcome in business terms. And I put the business terms in quotations. That basically means thinking about kind of numbers. Is there a way that you can kind of capture numbers in your resume? And going back to that ATS kind of note that I said, ATS will pick up those numbers, right? They'll see like 300 plus or 90% increase of whatever. Like you want to have some of that in your resume throughout. Next slide. So this is one example, and I kind of build it out for you all. So, situation, task, action, results. So let's say the situation is you were a data analysis intern at an ed tech company, and your task was to clean and manage large data sets or spreadsheets. you took action to develop a new process. Yay, you're awesome, right? You are in your role, you're excelling. And this process led to updating this data set more quickly, right? So your bosses are super happy. You took that initiative. We want to capture that now in the resume. And the result of that is that you had, 300 phone calls that were processed really quickly in the span of a week. And this is just an example. You all can kind of think about your own experiences that can kind of fit within this framework. So your bullet point for this specific example would say something like this: created and implemented new intake process for clients to submit changes to their personal information in a quick manner, managed and changed on a biweekly basis, resulting in an increase in our outreach by 30%, right? So you really want to be able to kind of share the framework, kind of turn the framework into something that feels more like a narrative. So now I'm actually going to give you all a chance to try this out. So if we hit next, please. All right, so I created a blank sheet for you. So you could, again, screenshot if you want to, but we're going to take a little bit more for this. So let's do 3 minutes of music so that you can do your own example, and feel free to use either a previous example or one from a current job. Thank you. All right. So that was a quick practice, but I want to leave you with a framework, because the goal of today is really for you to leave this session being able to do it on your own. and being able to like just feel more naturally doing this on your own, right? Where it doesn't feel like there's resistance or anxiety to even approach the resume. Does anybody want to give us maybe a quick example of something that they wrote or brainstormed? Or feel free to copy and paste it into the chat. Awesome. Thank you, Allison. Yeah, managed and documented the rate of reproductive success of captive gopher frogs in an efficient manner. Recorded and followed the success of over 14,000 eggs hatching and tadpoles. So this is dope because I'm not in the science, right? So this is what you need to be crafting it for your roles, right? So this is a great example of how to kind of think about it, think about the framework, and then applying it to your specific field. So thank you, Allison, for sharing that. Great. So the next few slides are just examples. So we can go through them just a little bit quickly. This is just an example of what your resume can look like. One advice, keep it consistent to your cover letter. So if you are going to use, for example, in this example, we have this kind of yellow heading. You want to keep that consistent with the cover letter as well. So we can hit next. This is an example of kind of two different overview sections. So the first one is very quickly just broadly talking about what this person is about. The second one is one that I prefer more because you can go into more details. So over 10 years of X thing, supporting legal advocate for X years. So these are just kind of two examples to show you how you can kind of level up that overview section. Next slide. Next slide, please. Oh no. Can we hit the next slide, please? I don't know if it's frozen. Okay, I can try to share screen.
Yeah, I got you too.
Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this is an example of one of the blurbs. I just want to highlight. So underneath here, we have like X Foundation, houses, da, 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 da. If you are coming from experiences that you need to provide more context of like what that org was, this is kind of the S in the STAR framework. So you can kind of provide generally what that context is in like a 2 short lines right above the bullet points. So that's one way where you can kind of give context without taking up all your bullet points and just providing context of that org. Okay, so that's one quick tip when thinking about how do I provide context without it not shining on me anymore. Hit next, please. Yeah, okay. So this is another example, just quickly. Next slide. How the education and university stuff can look like. So again, relevant courses. Next slide. Next slide. Again, an example of the STAR, so we can hit next. So kind of how you can hit it all in that one blurb. Next slide. So very quickly, I'm going to rush through these so we can close out and you all have time to practice. So, oh, and I just noticed a typo. So what are cover letters? So cover letters are opportunity to link the personal to the professional. So this is where those 6 words that we came up with at the beginning of this workshop can go into that cover letter to connect those experiences together. So, for example, for myself, as somebody who grew up in the immigrant rights movement, that is something that is always in my cover letters. That is like crucial to my identity. That is grounding of why I do the work that I do. There's a way to emphasize on the strengths that match the JD. So if there's certain like 2 or 3 skills you really want to emphasize, you can talk about them again in the cover letter. And then you can also share what is invisible in the resume or explain gaps. So if you have some gaps in your resume, this is an opportunity to kind of shine some light of like what happened, if you were out of the workforce and now coming back. The cover letter allows you to just explain that a little bit more. Next. So very quickly, clean and additive again. So little to no color. So keep it consistent to the resume. I know there's a bunch of Canva templates nowadays that people want to use. Be wary of those if you are submitting applications through an ATS system. Just make sure that they're still clean and being able to be read as a PDF file. Combine your PDFs. Some jobs will have certain instructions, so definitely follow those instructions. If they generally say like, send us your resume and cover letter, you want to make sure to combine those two into one file. And then I always say avoid LinkedIn apply. If there's actual instructions of how to submit the application, go through the company's website first and foremost before you apply with just your LinkedIn. And then again, 1 page maximum unless otherwise noted for the cover letter. Next, please. So a few sections, this is very similar to the personal story of self, which is who are you? The so what? Why is it that you want to work here? And then closing with, what is it about this JD that really called your attention? And so if you see on here, I have first paragraph, who are you? Why are you writing this? Why are you interested in this position? The so what is what skills are you bringing to this job? What skills are you bringing to the table? And then the last paragraph, which is what we call the call to action, what next? Why is it that you're applying? Just kind of summarizing this in the cover letter. Next slide. Okay, so we can go through these to just kind of show you all examples. Next slide. Next slide. These are the same questions as earlier as well. Next slide. All right, so we'll end here. And I linked a TED Talk on here. You all can look for it, Embrace the Near Win. And it talks about how it really does take practice to get to that win, right? It's gonna take practice for you to build that resume skill and kind of approach the resume without anxiety over time. And so one quote from that TED Talk that I really like was, mastery is not a commitment to a goal, but more to a constant pursuit. What gets us to do this, what gets us forward, a forward thrust, more is a value of a near win. So even when you're feeling like, oh, I really excelled in that interview, my resume, my cover letter are amazing, there might still feel like, like I still didn't get the job. But that near win really got you to a point where like, your career development materials are working, right? Like something is going right and you're at that near win to hopefully motivate you and get that win the next time around. So I went through that cover letter phase really quickly, so feel free to let me know if you have questions. But just want to reiterate, there is the Smash Summit coming up. And so making sure to prepare and join the future workshops and get more out of this space to be able to just fully engage in the metaverse, even with these things, I think will still be applicable. So thank you all for joining us, and I'll stick around for a few questions so we can hit the next slide. Oh yeah, I had some next steps and I forgot about those. So the next steps, just quickly, these are kind of homework if you want to think about it as that. Just things that you can do after this workshop to kind of keep working on these things and keep it fresh of mind for you as you're applying to jobs. So yeah, next slide, please. All right, so I'll pause there. You can contact me through these different platforms, and I'm happy to answer any questions now if things are coming up. And I see one question in here, so let me see. So the question was, what if you are like jack of all trades? Would you go for a specific role still, or would you go for a role that's like, I can do whatever and let them decide what they need? So that is a good question. I think when you're looking at job descriptions, you can tell in the job description if that's what they want, right? Do they want somebody who is like a content knowledge specific person, where you're bringing content specific like information and expertise? Or are you applying to a job where they need certain skill sets regardless of the content knowledge? So I hope that makes sense. I think it's up to you to decide what you would want to kind of do. If you're a jack of all trades and you're kind of comfortable in that space, I would say apply anyways and let the interview give you more context of like, yeah, what is this role actually entail? And am I going to be asked to be a jack of all trades, or am I going to be asked to be kind of more specific on this content that I should know? So I hope that answers the question. Any other questions?
Mirta, thank you so much. As folks are thinking about their questions, because we're definitely going to be here for a little bit to answer your questions, I want to get a round of applause for you. Honestly, that was so great. Folks, if you want to type in the chat or do some emojis, honestly, it's been even helpful for me. I'm over here like looking at my resume, like what have I not done? So thank you so much for joining us and for being in this space with us. Of course, yeah, like you said, we're going to be here for a little bit to answer all questions that might have come up. I definitely have written my own to chat with you later on. And thank you also for sharing about the summits. We're really excited for that, to have you hopefully be there as well. So folks have definitely another opportunity to see you. And then, yeah, we'll be emailing a lot of different information too. But of course, folks, feel free to ask any additional questions you may have. Use this space wisely. And you can unmute if you like.
Yeah, thank you all. If you have to jump off, no worries. Thank you for coming. See you all. Sivan, I think I see you unmuting. Have you had a question?
Yeah, I was actually just curious about if you're recently graduated from college, do you recommend putting education at the top so that people can see why you have less experience?
Good question. My personal advice is to put education at the bottom always.
Always.
So unless you're applying to like an academia type role, then maybe it would be more relevant to put up top. But for any other type of job, put it at the bottom. I have seen more and more folks nowadays not even put the dates for education.
Yeah.
So you can also do that if you're like, I don't want to come off as like too young.
Yeah.
That's fine. You can put it at the bottom, put your relevant courses. I would definitely think about, yeah, what did you do in college that can still be relevant experience, and uplift that as much as possible.
Cool. And then the other question that I had that I was recently told about was if you've also recently graduated from college, and let's just say your most relevant experience for the job you're applying to happened 2 years ago, that you should still put that at the top, even though it's not the most recent job experience.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
So I've heard either way. So I think I've heard it, and this is from different coaches too, like you can do either relevant or chronological.
Okay.
I like having something that was chronological as much as possible.
Okay.
If you have that experience from 2 years ago and decide to do chronological, you can put that in your summary highlight section. Right.
Okay.
So that way it's still up top without it actually being up top chronologically.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mirta, so much. And we also posted a survey, a feedback survey in the chat for all of those who've attended. So we just want to gain your insights into how you felt this workshop was, if it benefited you in your career journey, and how we can, develop our future workshops as we launch our summit series. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah. And there is a recording that will be sent out.
Yes, and it'll be posted to the Smash Summit page.
Great. Yeah, thank you. All right. Any other questions before we hop off? All right.
You were so good, Mirta. Like everyone just like
crystal clear.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. We'll also email out the survey for folks who had to jump off early. So if you're watching this recording and didn't do the survey here, check it out in your email. You should have that. Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Martha.
Everyone, thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Supriya. Bye, Ale. Bye, Rachel. Bye, everyone.